Hi, I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what is trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Chang from the Peak Podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Anne, great to be with you as always.
So Canada's largest grocery retailer, Loblaw, is ending the price freeze that it first announced back in October. This applied to its in-house no-name brand, and to be fair, it was supposed to be a 3-month campaign. That was the deal. But the company's getting a lot of flack for not extending it, even as food inflation continues to climb. Your thoughts, Brett?
Well, there's a lot of people who are really struggling right now. As you mentioned, food inflation is at near record highs, at least for our lifetime, and that's really costing a lot of Canadians. And so there is some frustration when they look at a company like Loblaw that's earning record profits off of that, because with the higher prices, they're taking a higher margin off of that, and that's not being returned back to Canadians. And the worst part about it is that there aren't many options. And so if you don't like Loblaws, you really only have 2 or 3 other choices out there because of how centralized our grocery industry is. So it's pretty frustrating to Canadians, and they're not really sure what to do, but there is definitely a lot of anger out there, Anne.
Yeah, and to hear Loblaw describe what's happening, yes, they are making record profit, but they're saying the margin is not on food items, it's on other things like pharma and cosmetics. So they don't want it all sort of lumped in together. Now, there are all kinds of ways to measure the success of a campaign or a strategy. And if you go based on what's happening on social media, which I admit is not a perfect reflection of popular opinion, but it does give you a sense of what a lot of people are thinking. This decision to end the price freeze was wildly unpopular. So I remember the anger around the major grocers' decision to cut hero pay. This was back in 2021. There were some companies like Longo's and Sobeys. They brought it back temporarily during the Omicron surge. Others chose not to. More recently, there's been a lot of anger around a tweet about $40 chicken breasts being sold at Loblaw. It seems like Galen Weston Jr.'s company has been a regular on the hot seat. Brett?
There's not a lot of companies that Canadians interact with on a near daily basis. Loblaw is one of the few. There's also Air Canada and the telcos. And those companies, they are more vulnerable to receiving this type of pushback from Canadians just because there's so much interaction with it. And like I said, there's been so much consolidation in the space. You just mentioned Longo's. Longo's was bought by Loblaws last year. And so there's been a lot of consolidation in the industry, meaning that Canadians feel helpless when it comes to situations like this, where they feel like they're getting shortchanged by a company that's making record profits. Now, even if that is mostly coming from pharma, a lot of Canadians they still look at it and they're thinking to themselves, well, why aren't I getting a break? And I think the no-name price freeze was a good step forward. And the fact that they're not continuing it, it was bound to get people frustrated. So I can't speak directly to the Loblaw's corporate communications policy and what they're thinking, but there needs to be a lot of empathy towards the tough times that Canadians are going through right now and the cost that these high grocery prices are having on their lives.
Yeah, maybe there needs to be a tweak in terms of that PR strategy, learn to read the room a little bit better. Let's move to the second topic. So we have another week and we have another ChatGPT debate. The makers of the ChatGPT artificial intelligence platform have responded to criticism that it is a tool for cheaters, certainly in the academic world, by unveiling a tool that's designed to catch cheaters. But much like ChatGPT, this new text classifier isn't foolproof. What are your thoughts on this, Brett?
It's an interesting debate. My opinion is that once you let the genie out of the bottle, it's hard to put it back in. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with ChatGPT. It also reminds me of a debate that was happening when I was in school with Wikipedia. I was in middle school when Wikipedia started to get really popular, and there was a real pushback from teachers and educators around the world that it was not a trustworthy source and that it shouldn't be used as such, and you still have to go to other sources and cite those appropriately. And what ended up happening was that the education system kind of adapted to this changing technology. And I think that's what needs to happen for ChatGPT. You really can't ban it unless you get a government to intervene. So it's very unlikely to happen. And I think it's about time that educators begin to look at, well, how do they evolve and become accustomed to using this type of technology to complement their education?
Yeah, I remember back in my day, there were these kinds of debates about whether or not you could use, Google as a tool for cheating. So it does kind of evolve. I want to talk a little bit, though, about a couple of things. So kudos to OpenAI for inventing this. But I would like to get into the wisdom of having the very people who created the problem be the ones to come up with a solution after the fact. So I think this is an invitation to the people who are working in the field of AI to deeply acknowledge and understand that this is a whole new digital frontier and that new approaches need to be developed. And in my view, this includes troubleshooting and being proactive before unleashing their creations into the world, even if it is a beta version. What are your thoughts, Brett?
There's a constant tension between the rollout of new technologies and the potential consequences that might have on society. And companies are a bit confused as to what their obligation is when it comes to the latter. Now, really, that's the role of governments to figure out. And if we had faster moving, more responsive governments to this type of technology, you'd have a better regulatory framework that would force companies to undertake that type of thought that you're proposing, which I do think is really important. But until that happens, there's not a lot of incentive for a company to do that when they could put out a technology that could make them, millions, if not billions of dollars worth of profit. So right now, the incentive structure is not there for them. And I agree with you. I think every company should think very thoughtfully before releasing this type of technology and what type of consequences that might have and what type of solutions to negative consequences they can come up with. But I also think that's the responsibility of regulators to put a lot of thought into this and be a lot quicker and more responsive to a rapidly changing world.
Okay, from ChatGPT to the latest GDP snapshot for Canada. We got that for the month of November, which showed a slowing of the economy. So these interest rate hikes, they have been working as designed. There are many signs that suggest that GDP was pretty flat in December, so not a recession, at least not yet. Many economists do expect to see a recession this year, starting as early as January. And all of this comes as the IMF lifts its 2023 growth forecast. This is the first time that it's done that in a year. All of this because of China's reopening and economic strength in the US and Europe. Brett, is it too early to talk about green shoots and signs of an economic recovery on the horizon?
The tough thing about economics is it is a social science, not a hard science, in that a lot of the predictions that are being made are simply that, predictions, and nobody really knows with certainty what's going to happen. You're seeing a lot of promising signs around the world. Numbers just came out this week that European inflation is down for the third month in a row, thanks to a reduction in energy prices and a flattening on that commodity. But we still have a lot of different risks that are ahead of us. And so it's a question of what is the best path forward, how central banks are going to respond, and that's going to really determine whether or not we see a full-on recession, a lighter recession, or a soft landing. But as of right now, if you look at all of the signs globally, it looks like we may be heading into a soft landing as the central bankers wanted. But inflation, we still have a long way to go on that, and we're going to have to feel some pain on that for prices to really start coming down.
Yeah, the inflation piece of it is such a tough nut to crack. It is global in nature. And just a little reminder to our audience, I know that you know this, Brett, that investors and certainly stock markets are forward-looking, and there is a growing body of evidence, that inflation may have peaked, and the global economy, it's kind of like the little engine that could. It is proving to be pretty resilient. I like to end things on a positive note.
I think that's great, and I really hope so. I'm crossing my fingers.
You bet. Thank you so much for your time and your insight, Brett.
Thank you, Anne.
And you can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily Podcast. It is available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.